I don't believe anybody is coming to save you. No one is going to take care of you. If you adopt that narrative of millennials are doomed, financial situation is bad, then your mentality towards money is automatically negative.
Why did you start a YouTube channel and a podcast around this very topic?
It was really about giving hope to other millennials that it's not all doom and gloom, that there are things you can do. It's not necessarily going to make you super rich multimillionaire, but...
Jonny is the creator of Millennials with Money, a YouTube channel and platform helping young people take control of their finances. What started as an Instagram page and blog in 2019 has grown into a global personal finance brand, empowering thousands to build wealth, gain confidence, and rethink what financial freedom looks like.
You're educating people on probably spending less and earning more, but now you're gonna sell something to those people.
I have a course that I'm working on currently that I hope to release July of this year. I'm running out of time.
Jonny, how are millennials doing with money?
Well, I guess that depends who you ask, doesn't it? If you read a lot of the narrative or lean into the narrative that we hear kind of in mainstream media and kind of in broader society, one would say that the situation is quite difficult, that costs of living are going up, it's becoming difficult to find good employment opportunities, salaries are not increasing at the same rate, and so millennials aren't able to save or invest as much of their money as they would like to. That's kind of why I set up the concept of Millennials with Money, which has evolved over time, but essentially to give hope and say that, one, you're not alone, and two, that there's things that you can do when it comes to managing your personal finances to make things a bit better.
So I'm going to pick your brain a bit here because obviously we're going to talk about your podcast and we're going to talk about how you do that, right? And why, and what's the business behind it, everything that you've envisioned for the show. But I'm genuinely interested into the topic as well. So I don't know what the exact metric is, but I'm sure you know it. I think it was something like for our parents or the generation before, so like 40, 50 years old, buying a house was 2 to 3 times the yearly salary of somebody, something like that. And now it's 10 or 15 times the yearly salary of somebody, which just shows you how much harder inflation taken into account, how harder it is for people to afford a house without going in debt for 25 years. Oh, wait, that's what we do. So how are we supposed to do as millennials? But like, how are they supposed to do?
How are millennials supposed to? Yeah, it is honestly a very difficult challenge. You know, there's a lot of different methods out there and different approaches that millennials or people could possibly take to improving their personal finances. I think it all depends on where you are at a particular moment in time. What is your financial situation as to where you go from there? For people who are perhaps struggling with, credit card debt or not making enough money to cover all the bills, then it might start with tackling those debts and trying to find ways to pay them off, create new income streams, whether that's through a side hustle, extra work, whatever that may be.
Yeah.
If you're someone who makes enough money, you've got a, let's say, quote unquote, good salary, but you're still not really saving or investing anything, then you might want to take a look at your budget and see, are there things in here that I could cut back on? Are there things that I'm spending money on that I don't need to be spending money on? And that can create some buffer for savings and investment. And there might be people who actually are saving money on a monthly basis, but they're not maximizing their wealth building potential because they don't know how to invest or because they simply haven't been taught about investing. So I think, in like the likes of the US and the UK, like financial culture is much broader than in some European countries, probably maybe the likes of France, although I feel like financial literacy in France is maybe similar levels, maybe not just a bit below the UK, but definitely in other European countries like Spain, for example, I observe, knowledge around finance investing is much lower than in some of these other countries. So, depending on which stage you're at, I think it can just be a case of what is the next step for me to move forward and what education do I need to help me get there.
So I'm going to double down on this because that's a topic I'm passionate about, not only because I'm a millennial myself, I just checked, but the situation can be overwhelming. I'm not going to say worrying, I'm going to say overwhelming. For instance, what's your take on retirement by capitalization versus participation, or whatever the term is in English. But like in France, we have a system where you don't capitalize for your retirement fund. You pay for those who are retired right now. Versus in the US, for instance, you pay into a fund that will be given back to you at the end of your life during your retirement. What that does is, from my understanding, you are kind of forced in the US to get a bit of financial literacy because you're literally actively managing your fund, whereas in France, it's taken care of for you. Are we going to say that it's not really? And there are multiple other systems like this in Europe. What's your take on this, and how should millennials approach retirement?
Yeah, well, I won't maybe go so much into the structural aspect as to how it all works and the system, because, that's a whole other debate. And there are people who say, the system is unsustainable. It won't be there when we get there. We need to do X, Y, and Z to change it. But it's an interesting point you make as well, because so in the US, so they do have, I believe, a social security as well. But, people who are saving towards retirement are contributing towards the likes of a 401k or Roth IRA, these kind of investment vehicles. Now, not necessarily similar, but retirement vehicles do exist in European countries, but they're perhaps not so widely publicized, or they're not so as widely utilized, because we've obviously come with this concept of I will get my state pension when I retire.
Yeah.
My take on it is, and this is a general philosophy I have in life, and specifically when it comes to personal finance, is that, I don't believe anybody is coming to save you. No one is going to take care of you. And I think you should focus on taking care of yourself. Maybe we'll go on with that last part. Yeah, you should focus on taking care of yourself rather than hoping that someone else, a person or entity, will do it further down the line. Particularly when you think that if we're millennials, if we'd started contributing to our retirement funds now, or even people in their 20s who start doing it, they can have multiple hundreds of thousands of euros, or even in the millions by the time they get there, just through their own contributions. And they don't necessarily have to be very big contributions at this stage in life, because of the power of compound interest.
So let's talk about this. Why did you see, I don't know if you saw a need. Why did you start a YouTube channel and a podcast around this very topic, Jonny?
As I said at the start, it was really about giving hope to other millennials that, it's not all doom and gloom, that there are things you can do. And that when you learn about saving, investing, what debt is and how it works, what investing is, how that works, how that can really transform your financial situation. Not only the tools like investing, like different investment vehicles and how to invest, but also kind of developing a mentality that is geared towards taking care of your personal finances and building financial security. Because I think within the narrative of, millennials are doomed, financial situation is bad, if you adopt that narrative, then your mentality towards money is automatically negative. And I think you can feel quite hopeless when it comes to that. But if you take a proactive stance of, I'm going to take care of my finances, I'm going to pay off my debt, I'm going to save X amount per month, I'm going to focus on investing or contributing to ISA in the UK, PA in France, or pension plan, or whatever it is, then you're taking control and you're looking after yourself and your family's needs. And that in itself is quite powerful. It's not necessarily going to make you, super rich multimillionaire, but it will definitely create a sense of financial security, which will help you over the long run, not just from a financial perspective, but from an overall life and well-being perspective as well. Because from my own life, what I've observed is, if you can get the money aspect of life right, that flows into other areas of your life as well, and they automatically start getting better.
Amen to that. So how do you do that practically, right? So you start a YouTube channel. Is the podcast the consequence of the YouTube channel? Like, can you tell us the story about how you started all this and how things are going?
Yeah, sure. Because what we just talked about there, it was very much kind of where the channel was in its infant stages. Anybody who watches Millennials with Money today will see quite a very different content catalog, videos, and direction that the channel has taken since back in 2019 when I originally started. So it started just as a web blog where I would make these posts talking about all the things I talked with you before about. During the pandemic, obviously, we were kind of locked down, and having been through kind of a relocation between like France and Spain with some time in the UK, the blog was put on hold at the time. And then, locked down, we're in our homes, and I thought, okay, there's no excuse really now. If I'm going to do this, now is the best time to do it. So took it to Instagram, started making infographics for Instagram, and then took it a step further and started making YouTube videos. As I say at the start, all very much geared around investing, personal finance, saving money.
Yeah.
And then as time went on, I've been a little bit of Spain content in the mix, and I saw that really started to get more interest in the personal finance content. I don't know if I would say that I resisted going down a complete change of direction. Maybe a couple of times I could say, yeah, I resisted it. But when I really looked onto, okay, my audience wants to know what life is like in Spain. They want to know what life is like living abroad. They want to see maybe the financial aspects of what it's like to live abroad. I thought, okay, then this is maybe something that I could tap into more. Because as much as I have information, things to offer on personal finance, perhaps they're going to other people already for that. And perhaps, I have something more niche and more unique to offer by going down this alternative route. And so by going down that route, that's kind of what the channel's become today, with a focus on Spain, but now starting to cover other countries and other aspects of travel and international living. And so Millennials with Money, whilst it originally had one meaning, you could say that it has a double meaning. So Millennials with Money was kind of the goal of what I wanted to be able to people. How can I say this? Millennials with Money is kind of the result of someone who would follow my channel or content and then make a change or positive change in their situation. Now, if we think about Millennials with Money, I would say, the people that follow the channel are in the millennial category, but they're people who've already got to that stage where their financial situation is good, or their employment situation is good, and they're looking for different opportunities in life.
So what's the biggest challenge that you faced starting this podcast, Jonny? Because you do the YouTube on a topic like close to your heart. You launch the podcast. It's not a change of heart, but then the audience shows you that they want to hear more about Spain and you in Spain. So what challenges do you encounter running the podcast while still helping, the audience that you aimed in the first place at helping, right? The millennials with their money.
That's a good question. So I still believe that I help millennials, and I still believe that the podcast is the way to do that. It's a great way to do that, because the podcast, I essentially started it only last year as well, and after kind of this change of direction of the channel. But I saw the podcast as a way to, one, bring in new viewpoints, different countries, different experiences, and two, introduce a new form of content to Millennials with Money, beyond kind of regular YouTube videos.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of to, create an alternative content format and to delve in a little bit deeper into some of the things I talk about on the channel with people who've maybe done it, or sometimes maybe have a different perspective to the way I see things as well, which I think is also good to show as well. So coming to your question, the challenges of getting started. First of all, I didn't realize what a time commitment it would be. Started a podcast. The Riverside platform that we're on now is a really great platform. It's what I use for my episodes. And it makes things really easy in that you've got the channels, you've got the video, you've got the audio, etc. But to really make an engaging, interesting podcast, you have to edit, especially if it's a video podcast, you do need to edit very carefully. You got to have switching between different guests, having them both on the screen at the same time. So that took time. That was relatively quickly solved as I gave it off to an editor after a few episodes. My editor who does my YouTube videos is now also doing my podcast episodes.
Nice.
That was one challenge. Another challenge is kind of getting guests at the start. Now, it helps that I obviously got a fairly established YouTube channel. So that, there's already a concept that exists that's proven, and it's now being taken into a podcast format. But, reaching out to people who might best fit the niche I'm in, they exist, they're there, but not everyone is available. Some people have significant followings and are very busy. Others are smaller creators, and they're equally great to have on the podcast as well. But it's just finding like the right people to get on and being able to tap into their story in a unique way that fits within the narrative of the channel, I would say.
So what made you decide to go quite rapidly, I understand, for externalizing parts, of the post-production? The reason I'm asking this, Jonny, is I talk to so many podcasters and lots of them keep holding on to their processes and keep holding on to doing everything themselves. Whilst clearly there is so much value in my opinion, externalizing part of the post-production that can be actually potentially even be done better by somebody else, so they can focus more on creating amazing content. What made you go for this, dare I say, quite rapidly in your journey?
Yeah, honestly, just having the financial capacity to do it. Had I not the financial capacity to be able to do it, then probably I would have continued doing it myself at the expense of a slower growth journey, I would say, had I continued to do it myself.
Yeah.
Granted, the podcast is still growing and is still not a big podcast by any means, but definitely, as you said, the quality output is much better, and the time it frees you up as well. It really does allow you to concentrate on value add tasks, let's say, like looking for guests, finding ways to improve your content offering, your podcast. So it is a really good investment if a podcast creator has the financial capacity to outsource parts of the production, then it does really free up your time. And buying back your time is both from a personal finance perspective and as a business perspective, is a very good investment. After a certain point, I'll put the caveat there.
100%. No, that's what money is for. But indeed, once, primary needs, let's say, are covered and even with a bit of a buffer.
Exactly.
But cool, that makes sense. So I like that you emphasize this because for sure, like if you want to externalize, you should make sure that you can afford it. That's 100%. But then it's like at the cost of growth, right? If you don't do it once you have the means to do it. So that is a good one. Talk to me about guests. What made it difficult to find the first guests, and how did you fix that?
So the first guests, I would say, were not too hard to find because I went for people who I knew or who I had previously worked with or discussed. So that kind of was a nice way to get the ball rolling, get a couple of episodes out there. People can see what it's about. And then it kind of gives you a reference for future guests to say, oh, I worked with this person or this person. You probably know them, especially if they're like an established creator or they've got a decent platform. Then that can really help you with getting the guests. I would say, yeah, like going with people that you know at the start who are willing to do an episode to get you started. It's kind of like a snowball effect if you think about it. Once you've got 1 or 2 episodes, you've got some guests, then that can really help the podcast keep going. So if you make that snowball roll easier at the start, that can really help you.
With your authorization, Tony, I'm going to double down on this. When launching a podcast, especially for brand building purposes and educational purposes, potentially lead gen purposes, inviting the first guests who are existing acquaintances, people you know from your network, who are relevant to the show, of course, is the best thing you can do. And then the next step to this is you interview them and you ask the very sweet question at the end, hey, who else do you know who's as awesome as you and does the same thing as you, would be a great guest for the show? And usually they're going to name a couple of names and you can say, hey, amazing, would you mind doing a 3-word introduction? If that's no issue at all. And here you go. You get guests referred to you instead of trying to reach out to new people without knowing them. And here we go. You get qualitative guests who got referred to you and who are excited to come on the show.
Yeah, that's a great one actually, because that's a massive time saver as well, because looking for guests, you often end up doing research on YouTube or different social platforms to see who might be a good fit. And you can invest a lot of time trying to find someone, research someone, and then ultimately decide, no, maybe not. But so that can be quite a time-consuming and challenging process. I really like your suggestion there. I might even leverage it myself.
So you know what question I'm going to ask you at the end of this episode, Jonny?
Sure. Yeah, definitely.
But that makes sense. Look, so the two that you mentioned are the classic issues when it comes to podcasting, right? How time consuming it is, not only to post produce, but also to come up with amazing episodes. But this clearly you're doing. You have 13,000 subscribers, on YouTube. So clearly doing something right. And then finding the guest, if you want to have guests, can be tricky at the beginning, but once you get the hang of it, and once you get big enough so that people come to you, then it's all much, much easier. Cool. Can you tell me a bit about monetization, Jonny? Because you moved to Spain, right, for a certain reason. So curious to know what you're doing in terms of monetization with your podcast and what's the plan.
So monetization with the podcast is, I started something last year and then stopped just because of time, but it's something that I do need to start doing again. So I had existing affiliate programs kind of on the channel, or sponsors or partners, however you want to look at it. So what I would do to start monetizing at the beginning was, after a few episodes in this was kind of add sections into the podcast at maybe 15, 20-minute intervals, depending on the episode length. Try not to run more than 2 or 3, with the aim of directing people to those links, either in the show notes or in the YouTube description.
Mm-hmm.
I can't measure how effective that was, which probably means I didn't quite execute it correctly, especially given that I kind of ended up dropping off and not doing it, and not doing it currently either. But it is something I'm looking to reintroduce. Also, in tandem with that is giving channel subscribers or patrons the opportunity to watch the episodes without those ad segments, and without maybe YouTube monetization as well. So that way you've got a couple of potential income streams. You've got, additional referrals through your affiliate programs or your partners, but you've also got the opportunity to create a stable, loyal fan base if people really like your episodes, through subscribers to your YouTube channel tiers or your Patreon. And I believe, I'm not at the point that you can do it yet, but I believe you can also monetize on Spotify as well. Yeah.
I like this. But I believe that you also know this is not the best way. Do you have something in mind for the upcoming future?
Yeah, I mean, probably in addition to that, kind of redirect listeners to the growing and business that I'm building around the content creation business. This is something we obviously talked about kind of as we were preparing this. I can go into it now if you want.
Yeah, for sure.
I started kind of, a lot of people will start their business maybe. I don't know what the split is, to be honest, because everyone kind of wants to be a content creator
nowadays.
But there's also people who actually have an established business and then use content creation to kind of, as marketing, as publicity, as an extra income stream. So that's one way, I guess. But I went the opposite way, which, as I say, I don't know how many people are doing the same, is kind of start content creation, but then realize, if I really want to monetize this and turn it into a business, I need some substance, some product, something concrete to offer my viewers, my listeners, whatever. So I ended up, through my finance knowledge, building a couple of calculators for how much is it going to cost me to buy a property in Spain? What is my expected cost of living in Spain if I move there? What taxes do I expect to pay when I'm in Spain? These 3 products are kind of where I started.
Mm-hmm.
And I promoted them primarily through just the YouTube channel videos. I haven't really talked about them too much through the podcast, but by essentially giving people a sample of how they work through the YouTube videos, it was really successful in directing people to the digital products and getting them sales. So those are products that already exist. I have a course that I'm working on currently that I hope to release June, July of this year. June, I'm running out of time, but maybe in the third quarter of this year, I do expect to have it ready. So that's going to be a really solid product offering that I can direct people to. And then I have a couple more course ideas as well, and product ideas. So particularly with the course, it's the idea of being like the cornerstone of the business, if you like, with the very central kind of product offering. So that, I guess, is maybe what you're thinking in terms of an effective way to monetize the podcast.
So I like the plan a lot. And again, to quickly give my 2 cents on this for the people listening to us on the best ways to monetize the podcast, again, in my opinion and experience, we've seen 4 main ways to monetize a podcast effectively, right? The first one is ads. And I think you talked about it. It's a good way. It's an easy way. Most importantly, you can go on Spotify for Podcaster, Megaphone, Libsyn, wherever you're hosting the podcast and just turn on ads. Same for YouTube, right? As long as you qualify, you can get some AdSense revenues. The problem with this way of monetizing, in my opinion, is that you need a lot of downloads to make it really interesting and profitable. And the ads are not particularly relevant to the audience, right? Typically, it's mass market ads, insurance, chocolates, or I don't know, VPNs, whatever. So easy to turn on, can be interesting if you have a big audience, but not always the best way to monetize, in my opinion. Second way is subscription-based model, right? So a Patreon, I think you covered this as well, Jonny. Like you offer something special to people willing to give you $5 to $10 a month. Much, much better because here you build a community. And in my opinion, that's super strong. If you get people to join in and you offer good value, you can retain them. But that's the main problem, actually. The main problem of subscription-based model is churn, like keeping people in, providing enough value, and it's more work for you, right? Technically, you need to come up with the content or the extra stuff that justifies paying $5 to $10 a month, except for the 10% of people who will do that just to support you, which is awesome. Third way is sponsorship. So you go to specific companies specific companies for whom your audience is the ideal client of. And here it becomes interesting because you can have a much higher CPM, which makes it more interesting for you, relevant for the audience. And if you do your job right, sponsors are happy, pay you more. The fourth way, which is in my opinion the most profitable and the most interesting for everybody, is your own products. People are listening to you at the end of the day. So they trust you, you've built authority, they engage with you. So if it's purchasing your product, there is a much higher conversion rate. You maintain the delivery, which is you're the one providing this. So usually you're much more strict on like the value of the product. And at the end of the day, a sponsor or an ad, you're part of the margin, you're part of the marketing budget, right? If you advertise your own product, all of a sudden, you get all of that margin. So for me, much, much more interesting, especially when the product or service is valuable, which I'm sure you're going to come up with, Jonny, because 13,000 subscribers on YouTube is not nothing, and you clearly care about what you do, and you're going to have to anyways. And I'm curious to get your take on this because you're educating people on probably spending less and earning more. But now you're going to sell something to those people. So it needs to be good and helping them in a way. And I'm sure that you've considered it. Actually, I'm not going to assume. What are your thoughts on this?
Absolutely, 100% agree. Actually, as part of the course, I talk about selling digital products as an addition. I talk about it as an additional income stream, and it's really funny because as I was recording the lesson, I was talking about this is how to be successful with digital products in a course and blah blah blah. And then I say it unless I'm like, and I hope that I'm doing a good job of this whilst with you whilst I'm doing this course. But one of the things I talk about in that lesson is, for me, obviously, like, I think there's a perception around courses and some digital products that they are overpriced, that they can be scams, that they are, not worth it in that sense. For me, I thought like that for a long time. And then I did 2 courses, like spending quite a lot of money on them as well. One on kind of property investment and one on global tax strategy.
Okay.
And the common thing that I got out of both courses that made me think, yeah, this was a good investment, this was money well spent, is that I was able to get back the value that I spent on the course in some way or another. So in the case of like the property investing course, I haven't invested in, like residential property or anything here yet in Spain, but it turns out that through the community, I ended up finding someone to do a refurbishment of my bathroom, which cost about 2,000 euros less than the person I was going to do it with.
Boom.
So with that, I essentially recovered the cost of the course. And then if you look in the kind of international tax one, that's a big investment. But if you plan things effectively, that can save you a lot of money down the line. So I think as long as you can find ways for people to get their investment back, like in the case of my course, my aspiration is that investing the money in the course, people will be able to recover that through being able to make more money through, saving money on their cost of living by moving abroad, by, or taxes or whatever it is. So that's kind of the value proposition that I have, because I very much agree with you as well that if I'm going to sell something, I want to do it with the principles that I live by, is that I should spend money on something that I really think is worth it and offers value.
I love it. And that's a good way to approach digital products in general, right? It's, hey, here is the business case for this. Like, you're going to be investing in yourself for sure, but here is how, if you follow the plan correctly, you will be making your money back and more whilst having learned something. And for me, that's the best way to sell a digital course. Again, assuming that the product is great. Something that I'm a bit curious to hear from you, Jonny. That is, so in order to get people to purchase your stuff, right, you need to have authority in front of them. They need to trust you. In podcast, we often refer that to, we often link that to the retention rate, right? Are people listening till the end of the episode, or do they just drop after 20, 30%? You're big on YouTube as well. So actually, how do you manage retention rate? Do you see a big difference between YouTube and Apple Podcasts and Spotify? Like, how do you navigate this?
It's something that I should probably look more into. Even with my YouTube stats,
yeah,
I can go like quite a while without really looking at the stats, apart from the views, the click through, etc. But the retention is something I should definitely give more attention to. But I think something that actually a guest on the podcast suggested to me, and is something that I will probably implement. We're familiar with like probably the most successful podcasts, like Diary of a CEO, for example, is my like,
there we go.
How can I say, baseline reference for how to do a podcast well. And you look at how those episodes start. There's an intro of like 45 seconds to a minute with lots of very rapid cut-ups with dramatic music and effects. The cut-ups, you often watch the episode and it turns out that they've just chopped things out of context to make it more catchy, but it works because it gets you listening to the episode.
Here we go.
So I think that could be really effective, because it's a catchy hook. You don't know at what point that's going to come up in the episode, and that can keep the viewer listening because they want to hear about that specific thing that the guest said in the intro.
It's so funny you would say this, because actually we do trailers where we extract, snippets of the episode, 5-10 seconds, the ones that are the most punchy or like controversial with cliffhangers. So the way you describe this is actually very, very funny. No, and I like this. So, correct me if I'm wrong here, but usually the retention rate in proportion, right, in percentage on YouTube videos is a bit lower than on podcasts. Podcasts, you'll typically tune in, listen while doing something else. But the more you can work on increasing that retention rate, the better. Because if people listen till the end of your episodes or watch till the end of your videos, this is where you know you have an impact, and this is how you know people will take action, because you distributed value for a whole 45 to 60 minutes for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely love that. Jonny, anything that I didn't ask you about on how to do podcasting right that we should bring up?
Well, we haven't talked about the difference between virtual and presential podcasts. We could possibly talk about that as well.
Very correct. Go ahead. What's your take on this?
So I do virtual podcasts all via Riverside because I have guests from all around the world.
Which is the point.
And, I don't have a podcast studio, nor do I have the budget to it. And even less, fly in guests from Dubai, from Australia, from the US, that would be, crazy. I would have to, it's not on the cards, basically. So, but, platforms like Riverside, it makes podcasting really accessible. And you look at on the video here, like I've got just a Camlink 4K attached to my usual YouTube camera and this USB microphone, which is still giving pretty good quality.
It's good.
That's like, take out the camera and you look at just the connector and the microphone. That setup is probably less than 200 euros. And, that's really good. Because I think the podcasts where there's people there in person is really nice, because you can pan between different cameras and it looks like a conversation. It feels more like a conversation as the listener experience. You feel like you're present for that conversation. But, a well-executed virtual podcast, like we're doing now with good camera quality and good microphone, you know, it can give that same effect, even if the difference is just that you're cutting between different cameras in different rooms or in different countries, for example.
That's a very interesting one. Virtually, you can as well, right? Nothing stops us from having a camera here, a camera there, and we connect it all to Riverside. Riverside does that, actually. You can join from several things, but all of a sudden, it's a much more expensive set, as you mentioned. So multiple things. Again, it depends on what the objective of your podcast is, right? In my opinion. If it's to connect with people and share valuable insights, you can do virtual. Like, that works perfectly. My podcast is 100% virtual. I think we had, for other podcasts, 2 or 3 episodes in person out of 300, and that's totally fine. Because obviously virtual is great, but in person, to bond and to create a relationship with your guest is so strong. So if you have the opportunity to do that, you should definitely go for it. But it's a whole different setup, timing wise, right? Not only for the podcaster to fly the guest in, to like have the studio and so on, also for the guest. Like, they need to fly in, they need to take a couple of days off. Even in the US, right? You need to fly to another state. That's one day of like fully focusing on the podcast. Logistically, it's much harder.
Absolutely, yeah.
There are pros and cons. My personal opinion is that in our day and age, virtual does an absolute amazing job. But hey, Jonny, when we move to the US, you know, we can do this in person, and that's it.
Yeah. Nice.
Cool. Jonny, so first of all, thank you so much for coming on Podcast Gurus. If people want to find out more about you, what you're doing with Millennials with Money, where should they go?
So you can find me on YouTube, Millennials with Money. You can find me at my website, millennialswithmoney.com, all as one word. You can also follow me on Instagram at millennialswithmoney with an underscore at the end.
Lovely. We'll put all the links in the description. Jonny, thank you so much for coming on Podcast Gurus.
Pleasure, Guillaume. Thank you for having me.